friends. Today we're going to poke around in some places in friendship we either complain about or try to ignore. Like Dr. Phil says, how's that working for you?
Welcome to the Sifted Wheat Podcast with Leslie Lamb, a counselor by profession, a minister of truth, and a lover of people. This is a safe place where she sets a path for others to learn how to move through hard seasons with confidence and grace, encouraging your faith, empowering your choices, and challenging your perceptions through the Word, the wisdom from years of counseling others, and her own experience of being sifted. Here's Leslie.
First of all, if you haven't started from the Out of Order series, this might seem like a random topic. But as we go, we're hopefully leveling up, moving through primary to extended relationships to discuss how love functions best in each. So, what can I possibly mean when I say love your friends? Well, as a counselor, I get to see the hard side of friendship. I get to help people move out of people-pleasing and the fear of rejection, and the space that those crippling beliefs affect us most are, you guessed it, with our friends. From the time that time for us begins, we see this yearning for companionship. First in God, to create humans in his own image and just a little lower than the angels, to bring relationship that allows him to be loved and to be chosen. Then we see it with the issue of Adam not being able to find a suitable helpmeet. So another human is created to help with the continued multiplication of relationships and other humans with whom to do life. And from the beginning, there was tension. So why do we think that we can live a life without that pressure, especially with our friends? Proverbs 27:17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend." We say this a lot, or, well, some of us do. But if I'm honest, I don't think that we're really considering what it means. Do you know where we first see the word friend in the Bible? Was it in the reference to Adam and God, or Abraham, or David and Jonathan? Nope. It was actually in the story of Tamar and Judah. Still not ringing a bell? Well, this is the story, the weird story, where Judah, the father-in-law, doesn't fulfill the law to supply an heir to his daughter-in-law Tamar after her husband dies. So she poses as a prostitute, and he sleeps with her, and he offers her a goat, but she asks for more collateral. So he extends his offering, or bribe of silence, you might say, by giving her his signature ring and his walking stick, which signify his identity and his reputation. So at this point, who needs a goat when you've basically the man's wallet? But anyway, I digress. The man who is with him when each of these things occurs is Hira, his friend. That's the word raya, the same word that's used in Proverbs 27:17. I encourage you to go ahead and read the whole story for context, but for the sake of time and the point of this conversation, I want to point out that Hira didn't love his friend Judah very well. At any point in this story, Hira could have spoken up and corrected his friend to move in a more obedient way. But instead, he seemed to entertain his insecurities, and in his comfort, he directed him toward what his flesh wanted instead of toward God. Sure, God redeemed his choices and even made a provision for Tamar that her son Perez would be the lineage of Christ. But Hira fell into the role that many well-meaning but people-pleasing friends find themselves, playing the part of a yes man. Listen, there are most certainly places where we need to support and encourage our friends. We need to believe in them and sometimes for them. We need to be a safe space that they can run to, and we need to comfort them and allow them the opportunity to work through heavy emotions and guide them through limiting mindsets. But if we don't also find ourselves challenging them and correcting them in some of their unhealthy choices, we aren't loving them well. I don't know what we envision when we read iron sharpens iron, but I can promise you sharpening doesn't happen with a soft cloth. It's the grit and the tension and going against what is comfortable that produces a sharper tool. And if you've had an experience of clashing iron, metal against metal, what can result from that? Yeah, sparks. But that doesn't have to head to a full-blown fire. And fire doesn't have to burn up all that it touches. It can also refine and purify and sanitize. It all depends on what is allowed to fuel the fire that determines how big it gets or how dangerous it becomes. A little fire, after all, is good for the soul. That friend that rubs you the wrong way, maybe he or she is the one it will take to help you see yourself or others or God or even the world differently. This is important to our life experiences. We all need an opportunity to see the world differently, to determine what our own ideas and what our own beliefs need to be or should be or could be. If I have friends who only think the way that I do and only say what I like, there's going to be very little opportunity to grow. We need opposing views to help us develop our own views. We need struggle to strengthen or shift our personal positions in life and in even more specific circumstances. I once had a friend, well, she's still my friend, but in our friendship, I would listen and console and talk to her ad nauseum about all the things that she was complaining about and fearful about. And she would listen, but she would never put any of those things into practice. One day I got so mad that I was crying out to God about her and telling him I was done and that I wasn't going to keep wasting my words on her. Yeah, I know, not my finest moment, but don't judge. You might have been there a time or two yourself. When I was at perhaps the crescendo of this rant, I felt God say, I see your frustration and your anger. I see your tears, and I see her tears too. I hear her fear and her insecurity. And I know that you're frustrated, but I also know that your frustration is leading you to my voice, and I need you to stay in her life, to call her up, to pray for her, and keep loving her. I'm working even if you don't see it. And I heard him. And in that moment, I pictured her crying to him with that pain that she was feeling. And the next time I saw her differently. And the next time she complained, I heard it differently. And the next time she asked me to pray, I prayed with her in the moment and spoke encouraging words over her. And I trusted God was moving, even though I didn't see it. I still trust that God is answering those prayers we prayed. And I know that he hears. We are not to be a doormat to our friends. We aren't meant to be at their every beck and call. So if you're feeling that pressure, I encourage you to employ some boundaries and support. If you have a friend that you're allowing to rob you of peace and joy, it is your responsibility to make changes and set boundaries. And if you're going to remain in her life, you're going to have to, or they're going to become an enemy or a burden. And that isn't who God created them to be. Tension is never fun. It doesn't feel good, and it requires us to be strong. Love isn't weak or flattering. It's strong and empowering. You can use some of the same practices with your friends that I've shared in previous episodes about loving your parents and your spouse and even your children. So go back and listen and reflect on how to put those into practice in the space of friendship. But I also want to share with you 3 things that I found super helpful in navigating friendships in my own life. First, you need to express your boundaries and expectations. I don't know about you, but there are only so many hours in a day, and all of them seem to require our attention. So the thought that I can do it all and make time for it all is impossible and, quite honestly, exhausting. I've gotten really honest with my friends about my responsibilities, and I have to schedule intentional and specific time to meet with them when I know that I will be present and engaged. That might mean I'm looking at my calendar a month out for a space to meet with them, not because they aren't important, but because my bandwidth is limited. And I would much rather give an enthusiastic yes than a reluctant and regretful one that might build resentment. Listen, I love my friends enough to be honest with them. Another space that we can express boundaries is in conversation. I'm not saying dismiss topics that you don't like or make you uncomfortable. Discomfort is a part of growth, remember? But if you're growing dismissive with a friend because all they do is vent or complain, adjust the time spent in those spaces and provide more space for other things. For instance, you can say, I know you're really upset about this, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to vent, and I'll just listen. But then we need to discuss solutions, or we need to move on to different conversation. You can make that time longer if they need, but you do want to feel like you're more than just the ear hole in the friendship. And if you find yourself talking more and not allowing your friend space to share, slow down and listen, not to respond, but to really hear what your friend is saying. The second thing we need to do is allow challenge. For some, the fear of rejection and the need to people please will keep you validating and approving things that make you uncomfortable, which means you'll become distant and dismissive internally while seeming engaged and loyal externally. You don't need anyone's permission to make that change, but if you think you do, here it is. Proverbs 27:5-6 says, better is an open reprimand of loving correction than love that is hidden. Faithful are the wounds of a friend who corrects out of love and concern, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful because they serve his hidden agenda. Fear of rejection can be a hidden agenda that will keep us from saying what needs to be said and done. And the behavior that we operate out of in that fear is people-pleasing. The problem is that we don't show up honestly. We aren't vulnerable and we aren't authentic. We might think it, but we aren't saying it. I would much rather be rejected for telling someone the truth than encouraging a friend to believe a lie and follow its destruction. I haven't always been that way, but the older I get, the more I see the brevity of life and the importance of loving my friends in truth, pointing out dangers and encouraging them to pursue life, which looks more like surrender than satisfaction. So what I mean by honest challenge is this: say it in love and with care, but say it. Unlike Hira and Judah, there's another friendship in the Bible that required challenge. David and Jonathan. There's one part in their relationship where Jonathan wasn't convinced his dad, King Saul, was all bad. He wanted to see the good in his father. Who could blame him? And he encouraged David to believe it too. But David was discerning, and he felt and experienced the hatred of Saul. After all, he'd tried to kill him. He had to make the hard decision with his friend to challenge the relationship and point out what was threatening him. It wasn't until Jonathan accepted the challenge of his friend to test the king's loyalty that he saw for himself, yeah, my dad's paranoid, and you better run. David had a lot of respect for Saul as king and for his friend, but he made the hard choice to speak about what he was experiencing and allow conflict to reveal the truth. This honesty ended up being a future provision for the next generation of Saul's family. That brings us to another very important part of loving our friends. We need to be accountable to one another. If we call out one another's problems, we also need to provide accountability and support to help them move through it. There are levels to this, and it's important that we remember that we aren't responsible for them, but we can be responsible to them. To be honest, to encourage, and when needed, point them to resources that can better meet their needs. Accountability often gets a bad rap because so often we see it as policing. I'm here to make sure you aren't doing anything bad. That's the feeling that we get. But that's not really what accountability is meant to be. It's meant to be a space of support and encouragement, calling the other person up and praying with them to see them strengthened and empowered, not so they don't do what they shouldn't, but so that they live more in line with purpose and true identity. If I'm loving in order, loving God first and others second, then I'm not going to entertain their desires like old Hira did. Instead, I'm going to want to see them live free. Deception operates in secrecy. So if I love my friend, I'm going to allow space for vulnerability and intimacy and encourage honesty before God and those that might also be involved. Is it hard? You betcha. But I'm a life that was saved through the love of a dear friend who point blank told me, Leslie, you need someone to point out what you're doing wrong and support you to make changes, not a fan who just encourages your choices as long as you're happy. I thank her daily for that statement. And she remains a close confidant and someone I know will shoot it to me straight and seek God first and love me second. Like Nathan with David, when he'd taken Bathsheba as his own and had her husband executed, she was showing up in that space for me and saying, you are that man, or rather woman, as the case was. She She reminded me that I was created to bring life and hope, and I couldn't do that if I was not being truthful in my own life. In all honesty, without that friend, I wouldn't be doing this podcast today. I wouldn't have come through that sifting season quite the same. And I most certainly wouldn't have worked through and rejected the messages, shame, and guilt that had plagued me my whole life. Jesus appointed me a friend who loved me less than she loved him, and I'm better because of it. In return, I've loved her in the same way, calling her up to see her self-worth and reminding her of how her obedience made a way for many more to find freedom. Accountability is a mutual blessing. And even when it's gritty and painful, the tension creates a deeper faith that life can be better on the other side. And because she knew how to fight for me, I learned how to fight for her and all my other friends, clashing swords and all. So now you might be asking, but what if I hurt their feelings? I get it. The truth is you might, but feelings mend, or they can be managed. Feelings also aren't always connected to truth. So I can feel a certain way about someone or something and might not like it at all if you try to pull me away from that thing or person. But when the truth is revealed, and if you are seeking God for your life, it will, then what once hurt will become a wound that saves. Listen, my feelings weren't hurting when I was living in sin, but I was dying. I didn't realize it at the time, but as it turns out, I far prefer a slap to my ego than the destruction of my soul. And also, if you're led by God and his love and grace, then the words of correction and accountability will eventually be revealed as what they are, loving correction. So how are you loving your friends? Are you allowing tension and grit to refine the friendship or your worldview and sharpen you as an individual? Are you finding yourself making compromises in your own life so that your friend isn't upset or doesn't feel rejected? Are you choosing to set boundaries to provide time for what is important, or are you wearing yourself thin trying to be all things to all people? Are you providing accountability and support for what doesn't look good or seem healthy? Are you reminding your friend of their value and worth and calling them up more than inflating their ego with flattery? If you feel convicted on any of these points, it's not too late to correct that path. More than ever, we need to love our friends well. We need to know that there's a place to go that doesn't just make us comfortable, but can keep us safe. I also know that for some, this is going to be a confirmation and encouragement to just keep being the friend that you are. We're all in this together. And if we don't learn what it means to love our friends, we don't have a prayer in loving our enemies, because that's what our next conversation is. And believe me, it's got bite. I also want to end this by saying I appreciate each of you so much in this community. The support I've seen on social media that you extend to one another, resources that you've shared, highlights given, this just reminds me that we are all in this together. I'm also grateful that despite our recent interruption and losing one platform and then having to move to Podbean, we're back on track, learning lessons about life and relationships and how much Jesus cares about it all. If you like what you hear, share it with those in your circle. And if you don't mind, leave a review or a rating wherever you listen. This is a free resource to any and all, and I want to keep it that way. So thank you for your support, always. And until next time, keep seeking God for how to love others well.